Teresa was actually of partly Jewish stock. She grew up in a strictly religious house of the upper middle class, but she had lost her mother fairly early in life, and that made a deep impression on her. She was a boarder in a school in Avila for about 2 years, and she took the Carmelite habit in 1536 at the convent of the Incarnation, which was quite large. There were about 130 nuns there. But the observance was what it was. They had still close links with their families, and they would eat at home, this kind of thing. And there was inequality in the community itself because they were still depending in part on things coming from their families. And the observance, therefore, needed to be improved. So she became aware of that at an early stage. However, her own health wasn't brilliant, and she had, after her health had broken down, to leave the convent for nearly 2 years, following various cures. Now, providentially, she fell under the influence of her uncle, who introduced her to Francisco de Osuna's third spiritual alphabet. And this led her to the practice of mental prayer. Now, at this stage, convents tended to spend quite a lot of time in choir singing the office, and that would take quite a lot of time. So the element of mental prayer might not have been central. She herself, in the account that she gives of her life, tends to think that she wasn't fervent for some 15 years. But about 1556 something happened, and a kind of second conversion took place, and she began to experience mystical prayer, sometimes accompanied by visions and voices. This would explain why she dwells on these phenomena more than her contemporary St. John of the Cross. He has much to say on the interior life, but doesn't dwell quite so much on this question of visions. She was greatly helped by a number of Dominican and Jesuit confessors, and if she were given the choice between a holy confessor and a learned confessor, her instinct, her gut reaction, was to go to the learned one. She felt by instinct that it was secure and sure. That kept her anchored. In around 1558, she began to have thoughts about reforming the house that she was in. A lot of coming and going was happening there, ladies coming in from outside, guests, and this elasticity in the observance wasn't pleasing to her. But it was to happen in a more peaceful way. She was to found San Jose, still there to this day. In fact, a friend of mine entered there to find precisely the purity of the tradition. It's very strict still. It hasn't changed much. No heating, the double grill is still there, the old habit, the old customs. In Spain, quite a few of the monasteries kept the Teresian constitutions when the majority of the order went towards somewhat mitigated ones after the Second Vatican Council. Now, she was spiritually helped, spiritually close to a great ascetic and saint of the time, St. Peter of Alcantara, himself a reformer in the Franciscan movement. And by the way, he appeared to her after his death and said, "O blessed penance, which has earned so great a reward." He was beaming in ecstasy. So, with the help of this man, and also of the younger John of the Cross, she began to have thoughts of expanding this reform to other houses, and she was founding herself houses here and there. She has a book, of course, The Foundations. As regards John of the Cross, he was with the male Carmelites and was having thoughts of leaving them to become a Carthusian, because he too felt that there was a need for more strictness. And it was providentially at that point that he was intercepted by Teresa of Avila and persuaded to come on board with this reform within the Carmelite family. To make possible the long periods of mental prayer that she felt to be centrally important, certain things had to be adjusted. A great amount of solitude was to take place in their cell, strict enclosure was to be imposed, and the choir office was to be simplified, evolving from a sung chanted form to a recto tono form, monotone, which of course makes it faster and simpler and frees up much time then for what she wanted to be central mental prayer. That carried on and is still the case in quite a few houses essentially, but they have in other houses taken on more singing since the Second Vatican Council, usually in the vernacular. But this freeing up of much time for mental prayer was going to be important for the evolution of the reform. It led to, therefore, a whole moving inwards, the invisible, the unseen. And she herself is aware that whereas in the careful execution of sung liturgy and well-executed celebrations, energy can go towards the sustaining of the exterior, all correct and for God, the danger of fleeing into the external and therefore deluding oneself with regard to the quality of one's interior life is less great in the nudity of the 2 hours of being exposed to apparent emptiness, because that emptiness then is filled with the essential which otherwise can be avoided even in the consecrated life, the encounter. And this leads to a whole investigating of the dynamics of the interior. One cannot encounter the Lord unless different stages of purification are undergone. Therefore we have, grosso modo, these 3 levels. The purgative way, when one has to be purified interiorly and indeed exteriorly from bad habits, freeing up the will the illuminative way in which one is directly by the Holy Spirit given an understanding of things and acquires the mind of Christ, so that he is able to get through entirely and show us things, give us to understand things as they are. And the unitive way, but there is not an absolute barrier between the three. They come and go and oscillate between each other, but the tendency is towards union, and this has to happen. And it is a sad plight if one spends one's entire consecrated life not going towards union. And it can happen. We can start very well with great generosity, but be caught up in many things for the Lord and fail to reach union with him. And the test is, are we able calmly to return precisely to the long moments of nothing at all but regard? If there is no moment of intimacy where genuinely we have nothing but Jesus in the mind and heart in the day, then we're just too busy for him, and we're forgetting the message of Mary and Martha. One thing is necessary. One thing to conclude, in the case of the friars, they were to have a mixed life, because they were often orientated also towards the priesthood, and the contemplation would be communicated to others by the word and by its putting into print. The nuns were to be purely contemplative. With regard to the men, that applies still. We don't always have to say a lot, but the word coming from the regard and perceived first, well aimed, left to hang in the void, has a greater and more lasting effect than many words badly prepared and spouted without limit.